introduce you. We'll go from one end to the other, give you guys about 10 minutes to read each.
Okay.
And then we'll do some questions. Thank you everybody for attending Horror Realm 2011. Today's panel features Tim Gross, Ray Lamberson, Matt Demas. Tim, why don't you start off if you'd like to read one of your wonderful reviews.
Yes.
Do you want the microphone? Will it work for the cameras better?
Yeah, you need the microphone for the cameras.
It'll pick up all the ambient noise.
Okay. This is my latest book, the big ass book. Pretty much I've written in the past 6-7 years, all in the book, including some reviews that have never been seen before. So, just before I read a couple of reviews. I do have an article that kind of pretty much sums up some of my reviews. Article is Random Facts, Useless Information, and How Does That Timeline Go Again about the Puppet Master series. Well, let's tackle possibly the most confusing timeline in horror film series history. Okay, Puppet Master fans, get your charts, calculators, and rollers out. The first movie has the Puppet Master Andre Toulon committing suicide in 1939. So the Nazis cannot steal his secret. But 50 years later is when the story really begins, when the puppets begin to terrorize the hotel after a man learns of his secret. Then in the second film taking place, the puppets dig up Toulon's corpse, and wait a minute, his tombstone says 1941. Are we to believe Toulon wasn't buried for 2 years? Or was Charles Band too cheap to hire a script supervisor? Or they just fucked it up from the start and just said, fuck it anyhow. Who's gonna notice? Apparently this retardedly, yep, I just made up a new word, insane horror movie fan did notice. But anyway, don't forget, Toulon does have a flashback about being in Cairo in 1912 during the first sequel, which is the same dream or flashback that is used several times throughout the series. In the end, Toulon is killed, and the puppets hook up with a woman named Camille to lead them. Next up in the series is a third film which takes place in 1941 Berlin. Okay, again, isn't Toulon dead? And didn't he commit suicide in the hotel on that coastline that we see in every Puppet Master trailer? But what is even funnier is the third, fourth, and fifth films, for that matter, don't even pretend to know about the ending of part 2 when the puppets were driving off with Camille. Apparently the fourth and fifth films, filmed back to back, did not care about the past either, as those two films take place a few years after the second movie took place. One thing to remember is that the third film begins the storyline of Toulon being a good guy. But the biggest fucked up of the fourth and fifth films was that the torch puppet appears out of nowhere after not appearing in the fourth film at all. Maybe this is why Jeff Burr was never to be heard from again. But what is introduced is the Sutek demon character that Toulon stole the secret from in 1912. When we were already under the impression from the second film, he was given the secret where he was with his beloved Ilsa. Which, don't get me started on the Ilsa character, as she was a redhead in one movie, a brunette in another movie. You still with me so far? No? Okay, let's move on anyway. Movie number 6 didn't fuck up as much that the character named Dr. McGrew might have bought the puppets at an auction long ago. Well, how long ago? Because it couldn't have been that long, or we are getting into freaky fuck up Friday the 13th timeline, which is almost impossible to explain. Does this mean Toulon gave them up, or Camille took them after her afterlife sell the puppets at this auction? These are important questions that go unanswered throughout the series, and are vital information we need to move on with. Then, when you watch the 7th film, you all get all kinds of discombobulated, as the film takes place in 1944, 4 miles from the Swiss border, and 3 or 5 years after death, depending if you want to believe the tombstone Toulon had in part 2. If you believe the storyline from part 3, you with me on that? Which begs the question, who shipped Toulon's body from Berlin if he was dead in 1941, as we seen on the tombstone? Or just supposed to ignore that little slip in the time continuum? Again, he didn't kill himself in 1939 in the first film. Shit, this guy got more clones than Dolly the Sheep at this point. But anyway, the 7th film looks like it's supposed to take place at the end of the 3rd film, when Toulon is traveling to America. So what happened to the young boy he was helping get away from the Nazis in the third film? Did Toulon kill him, sell him for a ham sandwich, kick his ass to the curb because there was no budget for a young boy in future films? Or did the Nazis actually get a hold of him? Wait, I got it. He was actually a clone of Toulon who aged quickly, so he was able to be in different places and at different times. Or the real Andre Toulon didn't exist because the great-grandnephew, Corey Feldman, ripped a hole with the flux capacitor in one of the puppets, allowing Toulon to travel time. Moving on, this film leaves you with a lot of questions about the timeline as it destroys any consistent timeline there might have been. And let's not forget, he tells the story of being in Paris in 1912 when melting away, when he met Elsa, his future wife. Whoa, people, what the fuck? Yes, that is your brain and mind melting all together. The 8th film just has some random old dude that claimed to be a boy to help Toulon back to America, but acknowledges his suicide, but never says what year it happens, but I think he is just lying about it anyhow. Which, at this point, Full Moon seemed to be just giving you the middle finger if you were actually keeping track. And the Feldman Abomination film doesn't even go near touching the timeline, but Axis of Evil goes and fucks with the timeline all over again. Even though the story is set in 1939, it all takes place seconds after Toulon's suicide, as a young man tries to protect the puppets from the Nazis. Even though if you go back and check your charts, Boys and Girls, Toulon has several different movies, still has his puppets. So did you get all that? Should I explain it again? Fuck it, instead just stab yourself in the face with dull pencils for a few minutes, because it would have been less painful than reading this useless piece of shitty information about the series. If you want, I can read other stuff, random facts about it.
Yeah, do one more.
Okay, or I can read just random reviews if you like.
Random reviews are great.
Okay, hold on. Where is Flesh-Eating Mothers at?
They're everywhere.
I love Flesh-Eating Mothers.
They're
I
everywhere.
think you needed a little flip chart to go with the
there we go.
timeline.
Flesh-Eating Mothers, on DVD, by the way, out of print now. Oh boy, folks, this is an underground classic that I've awaited to hit DVD for years. In 1989, I remember being 14 years old and renting this horribly filmed but fun movie. The title, for the most part, speaks for itself. Mothers from around the community begin to crave for flesh, mostly their sons and daughters, for some unexplained reason. Every time a murder happens, Commander Dixon puts the hush-hush on it because of a similar incident that happened to him a while back, which you see before the opening credits. But Commander Dixon can't keep it quiet any longer, as mothers from all around the community are eating their babies, their sons, trying to eat other people at town dances, try to fatten their kids up with milk before they eat them, even eating an ordinary alley cat, which, by the way, is so fucking cool. But look out, the local morgue midget knows how to stop this mysterious virus that has seemed to infect all of the mothers. With help of what's left of the teenagers, try to give them the antivirus to the mothers before Dixon and the police are forced to kill them all. There are tons of gore, bad face makeup, but well worth watching for laughs all the way through. Also, you can look for the teenager that plays a part who was actually on the TV series Head of the Class. But who cares? It's Flesh-Eating Mothers. The DVD only comes with the trailer of the film, but somehow is widescreen for the first time on DVD. I give this film 3 stars, a must-buy for any hardcore horror collection.
Nice.
Directed by James Martin, who wrote I Was a Teenage Zombie, which I worked on. And then he disappeared.
Some of them do.
My name is Greg Lamberson, and I'm going to read from my new book, Cosmic Forces, which is in bookstores now. This is the 3rd book in the Jake Hellman Files series, which began with Personal Demons and continues with Desperate Souls. And all you need to know by way of setup is that Jake Hellman is an occult detective. In book 2, he had his eye stabbed out, so he only has one eye in book 3. The villain in Cosmic Forces is sort of a Thulu type. He's a mutant octopus with 1 brain and 4 eyes. Still has 8 tentacles. And there's a sort of a cabal of rich old men who carry out his wishes. And then there are a number of other creatures called Watchers, which have feelers for faces. And in this scene, Jake is dealing with one of those. If I go over my 10, feel free to wave me on. I didn't time this, and I haven't read this before.
No problem.
Jake opened his eye in total darkness. He lay on one side, metal vibrating beneath him. Running his palms over the cold floor, his fingers found long, parallel grooves. His head throbbed and his body felt like rubber, as if he had just come down from a 3-day binge. The sound of an engine filled his ears and gasoline fumes lingered in his nostrils. Cargo van, he thought, or truck, moving. At least I'm alive. His throat ached. He tried to sit up, but the task proved too difficult. Paralyzed? Perhaps the creature's venom worked like a black widow's, immobilizing the victims. He raised his hands to his face and ran his fingers down to his chin, which caused his fingertips to tingle. His stomach seized up, and even as he worked his way up on his hands and knees, his stomach heaved vomit out of his mouth. So much for Angeline's cooking. As an acidic smell rose to his nostrils, he stood on wobbling knees and stutter-stepped to the back end of the vehicle, his heavy footsteps echoing. The amount of headroom and the distance he covered told him he was in the back of a large truck. He slammed into steel doors and groaned. Sliding his hands along the doors, he determined there was no way to open them from the inside. His stomach felt queasy. Bending his knees, he pressed his back against the doors and searched his pockets. They were empty. No wallet, no keys, no maglite. He patted his torso. They had removed his shoulder holster and Glock. He pulled at his fingers frantically. The ring was gone. Son of a bitch! The truck rolled over a bump or a pothole, and a banging sound echoed throughout the compartment. The hair on the back of Jake's neck stood on end, and his eyes searched the darkness for any trace of light, something he could use as a reference point to get his bearings. Pure blackness. Marissa filled Jake's thoughts. Maybe she was in the truck too. He addressed the darkness. Hello? Is anyone else in here? No answer. Where were they taking him? To meet Aberdeen. Jake still refused to believe a giant sea monster had sunk the yacht with Governor Santucci aboard, despite the existence of the Watchers. He found his way to the corner and slid his right hand along the side of the truck. Tilting his head, he hoped to see a hatch in the ceiling, but darkness overwhelmed him. With his back pressed against the truck's side, he inched toward the front end of the truck. The air grew thick, and he felt perspiration on his forehead and under his arms. His breathing came in short rasps, and when he tried to control it, his heart sped up. After effects of the venom, or he smelled fish. A low hiss sliced through the darkness ahead, causing him to jump back with his heart thudding in his chest. A Watcher! He was locked in the truck with one of the creatures, without the protection afforded by the ring. Raising his fist in a defensive manner, he heard something scrape the metal floor to his left. Claws. An identical sound came from his right. There are two of them. Both of the children he had failed to kill. His eye prowled the darkness as he tried to determine the exact location of each creature. Had they been waiting for him to regain consciousness? Or had he put them on the defense by stepping too close to them? Swallowing, he stepped back. One of the creatures hissed, then the other. The sounds reminded Jake of saliva gurgling through a breathing tube. Wasting no time, he aimed a kick straight ahead and connected with one of the creatures. The creature let out a startled cry, and Jake heard it slam onto the floor. As he brought his foot back down for balance and rotated his body to throw a punch at the second Watcher, the left side of his face exploded with pain, and he let out a cry. At first, he thought the creature had shot him with its tongue, but when he touched his face, igniting a second wave of pain, 3 of his fingers slipped through a deep gash below his cheek, and he touched his gums and teeth. Jerking his hand back, the fingers came away sticky with blood. With a single swipe of its claw, the Watcher had left 4 deep canyons in Jake's face. He felt warm blood flowing down his neck, and sweat trickling down the temple caused the top gash to sting even more. Driven by blind panic, he ducked low and past the creature, turning in a circle where he estimated the center of the floor to be. He touched his face again and winced. He felt as if he had 4 new mouths below his missing eye. He heard the creatures circling him, the sound of their claws on the metal floor alerting him to their approximate positions. They seem to have no trouble locating him. They can see in the dark. If they truly were amphibious, their eyes were developed to see in the dark water. That's why they only come out at night. Their eyes are too sensitive for sunlight. He continued to turn in small circles, tracking the sound of their movement. They seemed to face him from opposite sides, from the front and the back. He reversed his direction and they hissed. They're communicating, strategizing. Their sounds grew closer. He needed to seize control of the situation, or they would tear him to pieces. He stopped turning, and as they did the same, he jumped off the floor. Then he slammed his feet down on the metal so hard the sound reverberated around the walls. The creature's hissing grew louder, and then he heard a wet gurgling sound, which he knew indicated they were about to shoot their tongues at him. Their tongues are 5 feet long. Have to time this just right. If he moved too soon or too late, he would receive a double dose of the juice, which he imagined could easily kill him or at least destroy his mind. Now! Jake dropped to his knees and heard what sounded like water bursting from a garden hose. The creature before him let out a surprised grunt, and Jake heard both creatures retract their long tongues with slurping sounds. The watcher he had kicked to the floor returned there, and he heard it writhing around. Then it turned still. Pivoting as he stood, Jake faced where he believed the remaining creature coiled to strike. Hearing the gurgling sound, he tensed his body, ready to spring. The watcher drew the sound out, waiting. Then Jake heard the creature's tongue lash out, and he stepped to his left and swatted the space where he had just stood. The tongue wrapped around his left forearm several times, and he caught its tip with his right hand, causing the creature to shriek. He heard venom strike the wall behind him. Shifting the tongue's tip into his left hand, he jerked hard on the organ and heard the watcher staggering toward him with a high-pitched squeal. He punched the thing square in the face, burying his fist in the twitching feelers. The creature fell back and sprang forward in an effort to protect its tongue. Jake groped for the feelers and cried out when several tiny mouths sank their miniature teeth into his hand and wrist. He charged into the watcher at full speed, driving the creature backwards into the opposite wall. When he felt the impact of it smashing against metal, he dropped low enough to ram his right shoulder into its chest and heard several ribs shatter, the creature bellowing in pain. Jake spun the watcher around so it faced the wall and drove the same shoulder into its back, which created several more snaps. Jake knew he could not let up the assault. In order to survive, he needed to stay within striking distance of the creature and give it no time to recover. Releasing its tongue, he hurled the monster to the floor and with all his strength, and the watcher screeched. Jake followed the noise through the darkness. His prodding right foot touched the creature's back as it got to his hands and knees, and he drove it back to the floor. He set one foot on the left side of the creature's head and the other on the right. Then he raised his right knee to his chest and drove his foot down as hard as he could. The watcher's skull collapsed, and Jake heard fluid squirting from both sides of its head. He stomped the soggy mass again and again. With his chest heaving, Jake wrenched his foot free of the sticky mess on the floor and staggered over to where he had heard the other creature collapse. Using his left foot for guidance, he located the watcher and kicked him. When the creature did not respond, he concluded that it was unconscious, stoned, or dead, but he didn't intend to take any chances. Further prodding confirmed this creature lay on its back, and Jake straddled the watcher's head. As he raised his foot, he knew he was taking a chance. If the creature was playing possum, it could easily shoot its tongue straight up into his scrotum. He brought his foot down, but felt powerful resistance as two claws seized his ankle and gave it a sharp twist. Jake turned in the same direction that the watcher twisted his ankle in, saving it, but he crashed face first to the metal floor. The watcher released Jake's ankle, and Jake rolled to his left just as the creature pounced where he had been. Jake attempted to get up, but the creature scrambled on top of him. The instant Jake felt the monster's claws touching his neck, he seized its scaly wrists and jerked its claws away before they could do to his throat what they had already done to his face. In that moment, he realized he had left his face vulnerable to the watcher's tongue and venom. When he heard the gurgling sound that prefaced each attack of the tongue, he released the creature's wrists and reached up with both hands. In under 2 seconds, his left hand closed over the back of the creature's neck, and his right hand found what felt like a lower jaw. He was so close to the thing that its feelers slimed his ruptured face. He had felt something in the undulating head open like a mouth, and he jerked its neck toward him while shoving its head back. He heard the watcher's tongue hiss out above his head at a different angle than the creature had intended, and felt its neck snap. The tongue dropped over his face like a dying snake, and he threw the foul-smelling body on the floor. I'm going to end there. That's about halfway through the section I had, but to find out what else happened,